as Indians, have to be concerned that our sovereignty is not in our hands. It is contingent on other people's friendship. India is still totally dependent. I mean, you look at how much India depends on China for basic fundamental things that we get. How much we get from Europe, how much we get from the United States is just absolutely staggering. So the sovereignty issue has not been addressed at the root cause.
We are a democracy, and therefore central government cannot dictate things all the time to everybody, especially the private sector. This and that is, there are a lot of frailties and impediments in our system, and running that system actually takes so much of the time of the government.
We need our own sovereignty. That sovereignty has to come from technology. Pakistan, while it is got no sovereignty of its own, being a total dependent on China, and China giving them all their technology, co-manufacturing their fighter jets and whatnot, is not a trivial power to laugh at. The China-Pakistan-Bangladesh is a very serious threat to, in hard power terms, to India's sovereignty.
So welcome everyone. Definitely big welcome to Rajiv ji, who's tuning in early morning, 2:30 a.m. Eastern time. Had to do a lot of tune-up and all of that, and now he's here. And welcome Kanwal ji. Big welcome to you as well. This is a conversation we've been looking forward to. I'm going to start with just Rajiv, leading the conversation. I know he has got very strong views and thoughts on this. So Rajiv, over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And thank you, Kanwal. It is such a pleasure to always talk to you. I want to start by giving a position which might not be that popular in India, but I think it's an important position to consider for the sake of our sovereignty. The position is that we are at the crossroads of a new revolution. We are in the early stages of a new industrial revolution, and the world is changing in such a fundamental way that many of the assumptions, many of the things that we are used to are not going to be valid anymore. It's a disconnect from the past in a very dramatic way. The best way to understand this is what happened in the previous industrial revolution, in the 1800s. When the electrification of industry happened, and there was a complete revolution in manufacturing, and defense, production, weapons, and it created a new military-industrial complex led by Britain and France, because they were the industrial revolution players, the leaders, and it created a new world order. So basically, new technology created new industrial base, which created new weaponry, which created a military, and this created a new world order. It was not soft power, it was not moral superiority, it was not who has more ethics and who has an older civilization, it was not narratives, it was not any of that. It was basically hard power. So hard power based on new technology created a new world order. And they were colonizers, mainly Britain and France initially, and then the colonized. And we lived through that for a long, long time. We all know that history. I believe that the world is going through that same thing again. The duopoly of Britain and France is now the duopoly of USA and China. It's USA versus China fighting each other the way Britain and France were enemies fighting each other. And at the same time, USA, China, besides fighting each other, are also taking over the rest of the world. So like the Britain, France carved out their colonies, they fought each other, but they also took over the rest of the world. I think we are undergoing something as profoundly different, as profound a shift as that. That's the revolution. It is not just a minor thing. It is not just one more technology, one more kind of, new industry happening, and we'll be changing and we'll train our people. It's a profound shift in the geopolitics based on hard power rather than soft power. So that's the basic premise of my entire thesis. And I feel that this has not been appreciated enough in India. and we celebrate our diplomatic victories, which are very important, and I appreciate those. We celebrate our narratives. We think that narratives will create sovereignty, but narratives never created sovereignty. If narratives were creating sovereignty, then Tibet would have been sovereign. But Tibet did not have the hard power. They had all the soft power. They had all the moral superiority. They were a free people and all those kind of good things. But those are not enough to guarantee you sovereignty. We are in that state right now where brute force, hard power, the military-industrial complex superiority is the determining factor on who has sovereignty, who has lost their sovereignty, who is colonized, and who is sort of an indirect colony, a kind of a satellite of somebody else. Now, this is not the kind of discussion that I'm finding happening in India, and there is an emotional resistance, a psychological resistance to listening to such views, because if you say such things, they'll call you all kind of names, rather than taking it seriously and at least investigating it as a thesis. So in that context, I have looked at in India's industrial policy. I think it is too much Jugaad, too many isolated islands of competence here and there, but not integrated, a lack of supply chain vertical integration, too many things that are dependent on imported things. For example, the internal combustion engine, the old 100-plus-year-old automobile industry, which is India has got over $100 billion worth of automobile industry. The combustion engine still relies on many parts that are from Germany because India doesn't make them. We are very proud of our space, but so many very critical parts are imported. We are very proud that we are now making EVs, but the batteries, which is the heart of the whole thing, are based on imported technology. We just have not invested in enough R&D and enough IP of our own, intellectual property of our own. We are very proud that we have lakhs of engineers, but they are not doing engineering. They are doing, Zomato delivery boys, those kind of things, all kind of nice jobs also they have. But they're not doing engineering. We are having to import engineering. We don't have our own jet engine design. I could go on. So my thesis is that lack of technology has led to a lack of military-industrial complex strength, which has led to hard power kind of weakness, and that is our vulnerability.
I think many of the things you have said are very relevant, and I don't think that I would disagree with you. The broad brush view you have given of where we are, what we lack, and our dependencies on the external world, our incapacity to build up sufficient hard power ourselves, this is all true. I think there are many people who understand this and realize this. The point is, the government is facing so many challenges on so many fronts, and managing, in fact, the domestic politics of India, it takes up so much time. Every few days, every few months, there are elections, and our Prime Minister has to get involved directly in this. So winning elections is, in fact, seems to be the prime focus at the political level of the government. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that they don't attend to other aspects of our polity and our economy and everything else. They do. But unfortunately, we are in the unique position, I don't think anywhere in the world, where the central leadership is constantly involved in electoral politics. I agree with you that the world is in the cusp of a very fundamental change. It is President Trump who is most responsible for it, because United States, for good or for bad, was the upholder of the world order. There were a lot of negative elements in this, but there were also some positive elements. But for whatever reason, which are not comprehensible, Trump is now on a road to self-destruction of US power. And in the process, because they are the most dominant country in the world, militarily, economically, technologically, and in terms of creating narratives, in terms of controlling global media, and the social media, which today has become so powerful that they condition the minds of the public, especially the younger generation. And that itself creates a very difficult political problem in many countries. So, because of all this, the Trump is now has upended the global order in a very dramatic way, and this will have a lot of consequences on the ground for everyone. There is no challenge to him. You can see he's been able to do what he wants. Complete lawlessness, complete disregard of international law. The language he uses, I will destroy Iran and bring it back to the Stone Age, that I don't respect international law. I believe in my instincts. I don't believe in morality except my own morality. And this is the president of the most powerful country in the world who's speaking in this vein and repeatedly. And this has had consequences down the line. In Venezuela, he goes and kidnaps the head of the state. And there is no squeak from anywhere. Even Russia, which could have stood up, China, which could have stood up, have been helpless. And then he goes and attacks Iran, which is a bigger blow to Russia and China because they are more deeply involved in Iran. And Iran is a very big country, 92 million people, and with tremendous reserves of oil and gas and everything else. But they've not been able to do anything. Look at Cuba. In 1962, when the Cuban crisis occurred, the Soviet Union stood up, and there was a real danger of a nuclear war. But this time, he's squeezing Cuba in a most inhuman way. And there's nothing that Russia can do except send one tanker of oil. So the only challenge that can Trump face is from within United States of America. If there is mounting contestation of the manner in which he is handling America, and if he loses the midterm elections, there may be some check on the rampage, global rampage that he is currently involved in. And this poses a very big challenge to us, because all said and done, United States is our biggest partner. Trade, services, technology, investment. There are a lot of things that one can get from the United States in order to achieve our own goals and realize our own aspirations. But how then do you deal with the United States of the kind that Trump is fashioning? We have to be very careful not to put too many eggs in the US basket. But then what are the other options we have? Russia, yes, we must nurture our ties with Russia. Very vital for the balance of international politics and the balance of our own foreign policy. And they can be very helpful in select areas, but they don't have either the investment potential or the technology potential or the economic potential to supplant the United States. China, it's interesting, the U.S. Deputy Secretary of State who came here a few weeks ago said quite openly at the Raisina dialogue that, speaking very positively about the future of India-US ties, but said that we will not commit the same mistake as we did with China. We're not going to let you become another China to compete with us. And then you have China. China is not going to let India become another China either. So there is a limit to what we can do with China in terms of investment, technology, and everything else. So Europe is an option, but Europe is currently very divided, and one can actually suspect that the future of the European Union itself is uncertain. They are at sea. They don't know what to do. They put their entire eggs in the US basket in terms of the Ukraine conflict and the anti-Russian positions they took and cut all energy ties with Russia. And now Trump has changed tack and they don't know what to do. because they've gone far too far in terms of delinking themselves from Russia, which means that there can never be any stable security architecture in Europe unless they do it in conjunction with Russia, which means that it will continue to remain unstable. We can still make use of the European Union or Europe because they have technology, they have economic power. It's a huge consumption market. It's our very big trade and partner. And in fact, the trade is relatively balanced. And we've signed the FTA with them. So there are good prospects there, but they cannot, since it's not a unified country as EU, and they have these internal fissures, there's a limit to how much we can rely on Europe. And my suspicion is that if Trump succeeds, I don't think he can, because walking out of NATO requires the Senate approval, 2/3, which is not going to happen. Neither can there be an act of Congress which allows Trump to walk out of NATO. But what he can do is actually make NATO dysfunctional. So NATO is there, but it doesn't operate. Now, if that happens, my suspicion is that the divisions and fissures in Europe, which are subdued because American power is there, and they control the politics, economics, and media and everything else of the country, of the Union, those fissures will begin to develop. One or two points on which I would like to make a comment. First is that, when Secretary of State Rubio was at the Munich Security Conference, what did he say? He talked so romantically about the colonial age. And in fact, he characterized the liberation movements against colonialism as communist movements. Look at the total lack of understanding and empathy towards the developing countries or the ex-colonial countries. And then if you couple that with the Monroe Doctrine and the Monroe Doctrine, you can see where the United States is headed. China, Rajiv Ji's outlined the possibility of a G2. But even if you look back during the Cold War era, when the United States was dominant, but there was the Russian imperial power. It was not simply Britain and France. It was Russia imperial power, which spread eastwards and a little bit westwards, but spread eastwards and forged a huge empire. Much of it still exists today, though after the collapse of the Soviet Union, it's not the same thing as before. And then there was also the Ottoman Empire. And the British and French were in conflict with these empires that also exist. India, unfortunately, was we were not an independent country. The Mughals and others were ruling us. Now, the problem here is that if you are thinking of a G2, Europe now is beginning to be very restless and wants to develop some independent capacity and strategic autonomy of its own. And that idea is gaining ground. But more than that, Russia is not going to accept a G2 because Russia becomes very, very vulnerable. A lot of territory of Russia is originally what the Chinese say, Chinese territory, and is hugely underpopulated. So therefore, in order to maintain their own territorial integrity and power, they are not going to accept Chinese overlordship. And India certainly won't. Despite all our handicaps, we won't accept that. And China has another problem, which, unlike the United States, United States has almost 800 bases in 80 countries. China, no, it has one base in Djibouti and potentially another base in Pakistan. It has a lot of economic clout, but it doesn't have military clout which it can exercise the way the United States is doing, because the basis of its military power are the basis that they have in so many countries. So China has a long way to go. Finally, one couple of points about industrial policy. The United States is not really to realize, and why he's right there, that we have to have an industrial policy. And the US has realized that because they didn't have an industrial policy, when China had one, all the manufacturing has gone out of the country and gone with China. And with regard to the other dependencies which Radhaji has mentioned, which are real, we must find a way out, whether it is lithium batteries or critical raw materials or critical technologies or solar chips or semiconductors and all these areas where China is very dominant. And we are now beginning to build from scratch our capacities. There's a long way to go. There's a huge challenge ahead. Therefore, we have to have very clear-cut, deeply developed industrial policy.
So I fully appreciate and fully agree with what you said, Kanwal. But the difference in my view stems from the premise. I fully believe in the AI, the power of AI, and by AI I mean all the related technologies, including semiconductors, including robotics, including materials, rare earths. I'm talking about all the technologies that are coming together to create an industrial revolution. I feel that power is so strong that it overrides all the diplomacy. Diplomacy can at best give us a second kind of an option, a kind of it's an alternative of some value, better than nothing, but it's not going to substitute the strong hard power that comes with this new kind of industry, new kind of technology. So I feel that the points you are making actually support what I'm saying. The helplessness of someone who does not have that hard power, the helplessness of someone who's 10 to 20 years behind, which is India, 10 to 20 years behind in critical technologies, which are necessary for industrial policy, for defense, military policy, or hard power. That helplessness is what you are saying. Do we go here? America let us down. Okay. So I would say Trump is not the original cause of India's problems. Trump is an accelerator. Trump is doing fast what was happening anyway. Even if there were no Trump, let's say there were no Trump and we had continued with the Biden administration or whatever, any of your favorite administrations in the US, the point is that the AI race India lost. And India may never be able to catch up. I'm fully aware and I know all the initiatives they've started. I look at them in detail and they are too late. The R&D budget is too small. The amount of the amount of intellectual property being owned by India is tiny compared to the others, and the lead is actually getting worse. So forget the Trump era diplomatic, geopolitical, all kind of issues that he's created. He's merely accelerated what I thought was already going to happen. I have been raising these things for 10 years. Since 2017, I've been talking about how AI is going to convert the world into haves and have-nots, AI haves and AI have-nots, colonizers and colonized. So I feel that this industrial revolution, which we are calling the AI revolution, but is more than just simple AI, it includes solar, it includes all kinds of things. This is so fundamental. This is creating haves and have-nots, and India is one of the have-nots. So have-nots can get together. We can make BRICS, but BRICS is also China-dominated largely. We can come up with, we have many friends. We'll make a coalition of all kind of people. Russia will come here, there. What the current Iran war, which is a stupid war, I agree. What it is showing is the helplessness of somebody who's a have-not in technology. This is the state of affairs. And Europe too is a have-not. The future of Europe, I would say the sovereignty of Europe is also in doubt. Sovereignty means the ability to defend oneself without foreign help. Because if you are defending yourself we are getting weapons from 5 countries without which the military says we can't defend ourselves. We're getting weapons from Russia, France, Britain, United States, and Israel. 5 countries. And we are very happy that, okay, I'm not dependent on 1, I'm dependent on 5. That means it's even worse. So China can defend itself with no foreign weapons or no foreign industry. It can defend itself. Right? United States can defend itself. Russia can defend itself. So it has sovereignty. Maybe it's not very broad-based, Europe cannot defend itself. You see, Japan could defend itself if it built up because it has that basic technological foundation, but right now it cannot. So if you define sovereignty not as how many friends we have, because those friends, as you yourself said, haven't come to our rescue. Depending on friends to compensate for our weaknesses is an old strategy of India from Nehru time, that, we are weak in this and we're weak in that, but we'll hug this fellow and that fellow is our friend and we do this deal and whatnot. And if this fellow is angry, we'll go to that fellow. I mean, this kind of a gymnastics, diplomatic gymnastics, is not going to compensate for our hard power weaknesses. And that is my primary thesis. So the artificial intelligence and related industries is going to determine who wins and who loses. And it has nothing to do with, you may have a million friends, but if they cannot have this kind of technology, they will lose, they will become colonized. That's how dramatic this whole new technological wave is, and there is not enough appreciation among the thinkers in India, among the media, among the government people about this fundamental fact. You mentioned, that we have industrial policy issue. Why aren't the Indian billionaires, who we are very proud they have so much money, that money is based on a consumer economy, why have they failed to invest in actual hard power R&D, in actual intellectual property? Why? What is the excuse that India doesn't have an operating system, India doesn't have its own search engines, India doesn't have its own fundamental AI models, India doesn't have, every element that we need for this new industrial revolution. If you make a list of 10 or 20 fundamental things, India has to import something or other. So even our AI is based on, using foreign elements, foreign tools. And we are very proud that we have this open source philosophy. When I debate this with Indian technocrats, they are very proud that we don't need to invent anything. Open source means ke mufat ka mil jayega. Somebody else will give it to us for free, as if those people are really that generous. That is an attitude of dependency. China started 15, 20 years ago. It's becoming totally self-sufficient, totally indigenous. They have all the equivalents of American technology at every single level, every building block they have. Hardware-wise, software-wise, and everything. They're lacking in semiconductors and they're rapidly catching up. United States is lacking in certain materials and rare earths, rapidly catching up. So you see, these two powers have realized the importance of 100% indigenous supply chain of R&D and technology, and they are fighting this technological war as to who will be allowed to export and not export and how to deny the other side certain things. India is still totally dependent. I mean, you look at how much India depends on China for basic fundamental things that we get. How much we get from Europe, how much we get from the United States is just absolutely staggering. So the sovereignty issue has not been addressed at the root cause. With the root cause is not diplomatic failure, because I'm glad we have wonderful diplomats, like Kanwal himself, who have done a very good job facing handicaps. I mean, our diplomats face handicap of we just don't have the hard power competence, and we have to compensate with all kind of diplomatic gymnastics. So I'm very glad we have these good diplomats. But my position is that this is not going to be enough, because the world knows, and now this latest war crisis has shown the world knows how dependent we are, how we can be brought down to our knees suddenly, because we are going around like a beggar saying, Russia nahi aaya, ye nahi aaya, usne nahi help kiya, wo nahi help kiya. That, in fact, makes my point that we are in an era where survival and sovereignty will not be dependent on diplomacy, friendship, moral superiority, and things like that, but on sheer brute force, hard power. History has been shaped in the past, time and time again, by brute force, hard power, in the hands of people who had no morality about it. I mean, Trump is just another one. But you can give these examples in history. There are time and time again this has happened. So we as Indians have to be concerned that our sovereignty is not in our hands. It is contingent on other people's friendship, and maybe this group will come to our rescue, and we will sign up that group. This business of should I join this group, that group? They will help. They will not help. This shows desperation. And India is very desperate because of this fundamental root problem. And even now, the industrial policy has not appreciated it. And when you look at the AI policy basically says we'll train lakhs of AI techies and rent them out. So we are renting brains renting brains to make quick money has been the Indian industrial policy. The whole IT sector has been based on you train Indian people, either you export them with H-1B visa somewhere else and you're dependent on them to take these people, or you invite them to hire them in India. You set up shops in India. We're very proud that so many Indians are working for American companies. China does not measure its success based on either some H-1B visa going to America or inviting, Microsoft to come to their country and hire 30, 40,000, 50,000 people. They're not doing that. They have their own industry, where they own the IP. It is made in China by Chinese, and this has been going on for 15, 20 years. And India is 15, 20 years behind in developing truly indigenous things that we own. Firstly, India files very few patents in this technology, very few. If you rank, we are not in the top 10. Secondly, most of the patents filed in India are filed by Microsoft and Facebook and their laboratories using Indian brains in India filing patents which they are owning, and we don't own them. So this fundamental lack of R&D, and this is a technological failure with all kind of scientists we have, with all kind of people in the government and ministry and all kind of very rich billionaire type people, we have not been able to make this kind of long-term investment. Why? Because it's short-term thinking. It's Jugaad. We can always do Jugaad. Indians are very good at that, how to improvise given your problems, how to improvise and survive and get past the latest handicap and move forward. So we are doing industrial Jugaad. It is an industrial Jugaad. And it is sold as, we have come and we have got this policy or that policy. But if you really look into the details, I have yet to see an industrial policy in India which is truly creating Swaraj, an industrial Swaraj, a technological Swaraj. That is what is missing.
I think, Rajivji, you made some very pertinent points in terms of the broad outline that you have presented, or where our failures are and what our goals should be. I don't think it is at all disputable. Everybody is agreed that artificial intelligence is going to change the way we live. It is going to have tremendous impact on societies, on relationships, on countries, on policies, on everything. People haven't perhaps yet adequately measured the impact of this. There are a lot of people who are very worried about how this is going to destroy the society that, as exists today. Others see a lot of potential in it. On the military side, there are very serious concerns that AI will then actually determine the war strategies of people, and the human element will increasingly get reduced. In fact, this attack on the Iranian girls' school in Minab, there is a view that the targets were decided through artificial intelligence, and hence this massacre of school children occurred. But this is a very, very serious concern going ahead. I also agree that although, mind you, we say that 20% or whatever the global workforce on artificial intelligence is Indian, which means that in terms of our capacity to scale things, we have a manpower. But is this manpower being used for our own goals, or is it being used, in fact, to the benefit of foreign investors and multinationals? We have these, 800 now, global capability centers, which are set up by foreign multinationals, which are doing a lot of original work and developing IPs. But these IPs belong to the multinationals and not to India. So while we can be proud in terms of, or we can say that, look, we are very hospitable, we are getting investment, a lot of work is being done in very advanced sectors, but if you look at it very closely, in terms of employment, yes, it is giving an opportunity to our people, but in terms of developing capacities which Rajiv spoke about, I think that's not going to happen. The other is that there is a debate always in India that, look, why do you want to reinvent the wheel? let the others develop these LLMs and everything else. We should focus on applications, which means that always be at the service of others. And that gives good employment and good salaries and good emoluments. So that mindset has to change. The other problem is one doesn't know how to deal with this. Now, one can always say that we are a democracy and therefore central government cannot dictate things all the time to everybody, especially the private sector. And then within our system, if any particular section of the public, including companies, feel that the government is imposing its will on them, they can run to the courts, and the courts give their own judgments and this and that. There are a lot of frailties and impediments in our system. And running that system actually takes so much of the time of the government that reforming it has become a tremendous task. Even if people like Rajiv ji and others, right-thinking people, want to show the way where we should go in terms of reforms, but our polity is such, our constitution is such, the distribution of power, political power within the system is such that it becomes very, very difficult in practical terms. So there is a big handicap we have. Unfortunately, for countries like China, they don't have that handicap at all. I mean, they have a private sector, but it is totally under the grip of the Chinese Communist Party. And they are the ones who make the plans, make long-term plans, think long ahead, don't think even 10 years ahead, they think 20 years ahead. And they build up capacities in a very systematic way, and they use the economic heft they have today to make sure that their ambitions are achieved by investing in countries, investing in raw materials, getting mining, getting hold of mining in Africa or Latin America or elsewhere to feed into their system so that they can achieve the goals. Now, the unfortunate thing is that as you become economically stronger, your choices become larger. Things that you can aspire to do, but you don't have the economic have to do it, they remain on paper. The moment you have that economic surplus, then you can do a lot of things which ought to be done. And China is in that position that they are able to do so. The other thought, Rajiv ji, which since you are a great student of civilization and you have some very, very thoughtful ideas about India asserting its civilisational power and its heritage and defining itself in a very different way from the rest of the world. And that brings me to the question, I'd like to have a view of yours on that. The model that Britain and France and other powers or United States have used in order to dominate the world through hard power is not something that is inherent in Indian civilization. Now, if we develop a very, very strong military-industrial complex in this country, that the consequence of the very strong military-industrial complex as we've seen in the United States and as we see in China, the PLA is a very, very powerful entity. It's a different matter. I mean, Xi Jinping is struggling against that. But if you look at the structures of their government, the PLA is very powerful in the institutionalized governance in China. We don't have that system. And our civilization heritage has not been this, where you go out and conquer and dominate and exploit and this and that and that. Now, are we therefore in a position, are we ready as a society to change our outlook and our mindset and our civilization heritage to that extent that we then now decide that the only way out for us to operate in the modern world is to develop brute force? And that brute force will be used for what? It's a dilemma. It's a very, very strong cultural and civilizational dilemma, I think. So we have to find an answer, though in practical terms, what you're saying is right. That if you want to have sovereignty, you have to be strong. You don't have to be dependent on others, especially in the defense domain. And you're very right that if 5 countries are giving you the capacity to defend yourself, it is dependence. It is dependence. It's not real strategic autonomy, because at critical moments, some of the things can be denied to you, and you would not be able to then defend yourself adequately. Government is trying to build up a defense industry, this and that. Here's another point, Rajivji, which I'd like to mention, which is that I'm a bit concerned that we want to get involved in global supply chains on the defense side. We are saying that Europe is now spending a lot of money on defense, going up to 5% of GDP. We want to get involved in supply chains with the defense, with the US defense complex. Now, it's the private sector that will do it, not the public sector. And if the private sector gets involved in manufacturing components and this and that for foreign companies, European or American, will that actually help us build a domestic defense industry? I mean, will they be able to build such a lot of capacity that they can be part of supply chains, and yet a large part of what they are manufacturing would actually feed into our own defense industrial complex? I'm not too sure. And therefore, are we making a mistake in chasing these supply lines which will service the Western defense industry? This is a thought that I would leave with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think, Kanwal, you made some more very, very important and interesting points.
So, Rajiv, quick thing from a time perspective, about 10 minutes. I wanted to take some Q&A also. So maybe if you can make a brief thought, and then we can do some Q&A.
Yeah. So, but I want to respond to some important points, questions he raised. So, is Indian civilization consistent or incompatible with hard power? Well, if you look at the old narratives where the weapons existed, whether they physically existed or whether they were in people's imagination, the point is that the narrative of weaponry, the narrative of material prosperity has been part of India. I think the Indian civilization has been mischaracterized as something which is otherworldly, and you sort of abandon the material prosperity. India was very prosperous, very successful country in material terms, including military strength. Did not attack other people, but was very capable of defending itself, and that is evident from all our ancient texts. So I would say what has changed is that we have betrayed our own civilization, because we are neither here nor there. We are not properly Americanized or Westernized like everybody aspires to be, nor are we true to ourselves. We are not true to our own civilizational strengths, which would create a kind of mind, a kind of yogic mind, a rishi mind, a meditative mind, which would be the pure thinking. We would have brilliant scientists, according to our civilization, given how much science we developed ourselves, mathematics and theoretical science and physics and whatnot, and medicine. So we would be, if we were true to our own civilization, we would be actually doing far better in terms of intellectual property, because we were the intellectual property leaders of the world. And people came to places like our universities, all these Nalanda and all these different places were like the Harvards of that time. And people sent their brightest students to India to learn, bring back the technology. China would send, for hundreds of years, they would send their most brilliant people to India to learn, go back. Like we are trying to send our people to foreign countries and bring back. So we have lost the status of being the learning center in the world, because we have all become sort of short-term jugadus. So we have become like the sepoys and these babus and zamindars during the British era. They were serving the European interests as middlemen. Our industrialists are like that. Today's industrialists and today's leaders are like zamindars. And while China has built this Belt and Road, which is a physical kind of a thing, to colonize without having its own bases, the United States is building its AI empire. It's building an AI empire. It's very clear. There is a 27 or 30-page AI, this thing that Trump introduced, which is actually showing that the US has to win this AI race, not only against China, but to conquer the rest of the world. How to conquer the rest of the world? They should use our models. They should build on US platforms, they should build their applications. And we should have lakhs and lakhs of their engineers working on our foundation, building value on our foundation, so we can turn it off at any time. US can turn off the right for other people to use its IP. It's open source. Turn it off. So this is the dependency like we are getting into. We are getting sucked into dependency, like China has sucked Pakistan into dependency on itself. Final point, PLA should be the role, RSS has that responsibility, building a society bottom up, like PLA. We're not communist, but still using whatever paradigms are friendly to our civilization, it is RSS building this bottom up. Has it done so? Have we created that self-sufficiency, that Swaraj, which the PLA has built for itself using their philosophy? We have to use our philosophy. So we have to have this kind of a comparison. And finally, I will leave a provocative thought. I feel that China is winning this technology race, this industrial revolution, beating the United States so far. And United States has realized it, and which is why Trump is desperate to start these wars, because there is a 3 to 5 year window when US has military superiority and it can still assert itself. And Trump is desperate to find ways to use the short-term military advantage in order to capture oil and capture things that we have, may throttle China longer term. This is kind of his military strategy against China. And whether it'll work or not, we don't know. But it's a desperate strategy by the United States because it sees that the time limit, the time horizon for it to assert itself is very, very short. And China is picking up, building more ships, more battleships, more aircraft carriers than anybody in the world. China will soon have 10 aircraft carriers, more modern, bigger, better than the United States, and submarine drones, space drones, whatnot. China is leading this war right now in terms of the acceleration with which it is going, and US needs to use its remaining advantages, whatever the remaining advantages are, short term, and try to turn them into longer term advantages. That's the war that is going on, that Trump is trying to fight. And whether he's doing it right or not, time will tell. But this shows that these two countries are way ahead of everybody else. And India is too large to become adopted. You can't adopt an elephant. I mean, you can adopt a little puppy dog, but India is too large to be adopted by Russia or this one or that one. We need our own sovereignty. That sovereignty has to come from technology. And I would like to leave this thought that Pakistan, while it is got no sovereignty of its own, being a total dependent on China, and China giving them all their technology, co-manufacturing their fighter jets and whatnot, is not a trivial power to laugh at. Pakistan is a strong power, and because of China, not because of its own sovereignty. This is a thought I would leave. And the China-Pakistan-Bangladesh is a very serious threat to, in hard power terms, to India's sovereignty. So that's my concluding remark. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Rajiv. I'm going to just open up for questions, and maybe before that, I'll interject a question or two of my own. What you said about the AI part is, of course, very true. I think this has been going on actually for some years already. The number of patents that China is filing in artificial intelligence, by the way, they're all in Chinese language, are far exceeding today the ones that the US is filing also. But how would you rank India? We are clearly neither number one nor number two, though those two are very far ahead of us. But I don't see any other major countries producing foundational models also. So that's one thought. And the other is, who is your advice, or what is your main exhortation? Are you saying India is lacking in policy, or this is a call to the policymakers, or who are we directing the criticism to, and who can fix it? What is the solution?
Well, I think the people who can fix it include industrialists, but industrialists are greedy, short term. They are using the consumer base of India to make money, milking the consumers and becoming very rich. They are not producers, they are consumers. They are intermediaries taking foreign fundamental technologies and turning it into Indian products and making and they're middlemen in that sense, in technological terms. But the people who can fix it are policymakers. And these policymakers do not want to listen to this. For example, recently there was an AI summit. They refused to have me talk. They refused. Absolutely, I have to be public on this. My team in India submitted many ideas, many proposals. I was willing to fly to India. This is not just one event. For the last 5-10 years, the willingness to listen is just not there. When you finally secure a meeting with some minister or some big bureaucrat thinker on the technology front, they listen to you, they take notes, they'll take a few headliners of your talk and they'll use it in their own talks, but they're not going to incorporate it because either they're scared, they don't have the power, or they don't have the imagination, or they just don't want to listen to anything. They want to spin what the public wants to hear. And Indians are very emotional people. They want to feel that we are winning, and they keep spinning this thing which is not even true. India is quite a lot more vulnerable than the spin of the government today.
And I'll take that with a question for Kanwalji, which is, what Rajiv is saying about in a way, the apathy of the state and the inability to listen. And I know Rajiv has previously also criticized departments, including the MEA, for being out of touch with India civilizationally or just in their own bureaucratic ways of doing things. How would you respond to that? And what is your solution as an insider? Can change happen? Can the Indian state be more aligned with the Indian civilization, or is it destined to remain at odds with it?
What I've seen as part of the government is that one should not underestimate the capacity of people in the government to think, identify problems, and recommend solutions. The trouble is that you have to have the resources to implement many of the things that you think should happen. We don't always have these resources. The other is the institutional part, where various parts of the government have to work together, in an extremely cooperative manner, be on the same page, and in their own way, not try and protect their turfs, but be part of a larger effort to achieve the goals that you set for yourself and the government sets for itself. See, the interesting thing in China is that here we are against elites in India. But the Chinese system works on elites. It is the elites that actually define the goals and the way to achieve those goals. But we are not like that at all. So there is this problem that we also have. In China, they don't have to then worry too much they don't have that problem about social reconstruction of the kind that we have to cope with. So those are the kind of things that come in the way. There's so much pressure on the government from simply managing our day-to-day life in this country, that in that process, the larger goals and aspirations of the people which are there, which can be identified, become more and more difficult to achieve. And the distribution of power within our system is such that makes the problem even more difficult. Now, in terms of civilizational heritage, look, this is a sensitive subject. How do you define Indian civilization? Is it Indian civilization before Harshvardhan, or is it something which goes beyond that? So this is the kind of problem today that the BJP and the RSS are facing. That when you talk about Indian civilization, are you talking about a composite civilization, or are you talking, frankly speaking, about a Hindu civilization? So I think we are not very clear within our own minds what should be the degree of understanding of our civilizational heritage. And if politicians from Tamil Nadu can openly abuse Sanatana Dharma in the most vicious manner, you can see where the problem is. It gets involved in politics. Yes. It gets electoral politics, opposition politics. So the other thing that I'd like to mention here is that at least for the last 1,000 years, we have not governed ourselves. we not govern ourselves. We haven't had the experience of a central government which thinks of the country as a whole and devises policies, internal and external, to achieve whatever goals are needed for a huge, huge country like ours. We not had that experience. It's only the last 70 odd years that we are governing ourselves. And we are governing ourselves with a tremendous, tremendous social fissures, religious fissures within the country. And we've given ourselves a polity, a constitution, which in a larger way is humanistic. It gives importance to the individual. There are a lot of positive elements, but it is not oriented to achieve the kind of goals that Rajiv ji has mentioned. So we have to cope with that. See, the other in terms of foreign policy. From my own experience, I can tell you that there are certain things which I opposed. We talked about Pakistan. I have certain very clear-cut views about Pakistan. I have never changed them. But decisions were taken which did not concur with my thinking, because there are so many elements that get fed into the system, especially in the Prime Minister's office and the Prime Minister himself, that they take these decisions. The whole business of this dialogue with Pakistan continued, despite the fact that it was very clear that his dialogue is not going to lead anywhere. I, as Foreign Secretary, had a particular view, which the Foreign Minister agreed with. But in the PMO, they had a different view, because maybe there were some other pressure points or advice or inputs, or from outside or inside, God knows. So I think one should not underestimate or think poorly of individuals within the system. They can have the right ideas, but our system is such that that synergy is not there, and that common and the shared thinking where India should be, we debate too much.
Well, I think there's one very fair point that Kanwalji raised, which is, I think, you're saying we haven't governed ourselves for 1,000 years. In many ways, we've been at war or in survival mode, right? We are barely emerging from that survival mode where we can even start to ask the kinds of questions that Rajiv is raising, and we have both the self-confidence and the resources to actually do something about it. So I think from that, I'm going to take some questions from the audience. Yes, sir. Rakesh ji.
Hello, I'm Rakesh Malhotra. I work with Rajiv ji. But I have got a very fundamental question to Rajiv ji and Mr. Sibal both. Have we not betrayed our civilization? Democratic, what we are saying, and the present form of democracy is just an anarchy. Is there any way where we can get it out of it? IQ of average politician, if you look at, is not more than 50. What do you expect out of it? The same is the situation of our bureaucrats too. If I take the AI policy, what we are talking about, that AI policy says that sovereignty means, Prime Minister says political statement, there is sovereign AI. What it means? Any model, it should be used on the Indian languages. It should use, the data must reside in India, it should use Indian data. We have lacked the entire thing naked. And what we are talking about, and then we go and talk to them again, there's no, we are talking application and all those things. So I think there's a paralysis on that, how to fix it. That's the question.
Okay. Rajiv, were you able to hear this?
Yeah, I'm able to hear this. I would love to hear Kanwalji's response. How to get the Indian machinery, the government machinery, to be able to listen to helpful, friendly, critical inputs. Because right now they only want to hear those who agree with them, and they'll stuff their summits and all that with foreign guys from Google and this and that, want to praise, pat their back, and actually they're selling out to these guys. They're selling out to the Ernst and Young and the Price Waterhouse and McKinsey and all the Western big tech companies. That is my concern, that we are, rather than sovereignty, even our thinking, even our strategic planning, and many of the reports that are coming out of the government of India, when you read them, they're full of references from these other people, just copy paste. This is the crisis that I'm facing in India.
No, I entirely agree with you. I think our system has been very deeply penetrated by all these consultancy organizations, and they all have Indian faces. And
Yes.
therefore, on the policy making side, they feel that they are talking to Indians, and Indians with goodwill, and who are interested in actually helping India achieve its goals. Whereas they are working for foreign organizations, and they are steering our policies and our thinking in the direction which would help the multinationals that they represent. And I can say that I've seen this at first hand, and I've been puzzled as to why we, for example, when we have some kind of technology event, why do we have to do in conjunction with Carnegie?
Right.
I've seen that happen more than once. And I've been saying, well, why do we need to do that? If you look at some of our think tanks and and they become very prominent in our system, but if you look at what their connections are and who's on their governing board and where some of their finances come, then you can see how much we are intellectually influenced by what they tell us, the inputs that we receive from them. A couple of other things in this connection, which is, we, because of the English language, we are exposed to the world, to the English language world. And all the ideas that are produced there come into India immediately, and we are absorbed because we have access to the English language. Unlike in Russia or China or elsewhere, there is no direct contact with the English language. In our case, and since many of the ideas and thoughts and strategies and analysis it come from the West, whether it's think tanks or media, they're well thought out, well structured, persuasive, well drafted. We absorb them. And hence what you said, Rajiji, and I've seen it myself, that when our economic advisors and others, I'm not mentioning any particular name, when they talk to us about our economic strategy, the reference points very frequently are reports that have appeared in the West. This is our problem. Intellectually, we are colonized.
Yes.
This is the problem.
Absolutely.
In my career, and I'm saying this with some pride, never, ever, ever mentioned any foreign source, any foreign person in terms of stressing networks.
So I am a co-founder in a AI startup, also an investor in deep tech a company which has we have a couple of more than a couple of patents which are filed or granted, and one of them involves hyperlocations, pinpointing up to sub-meter, even half a meter, 50 centimeter accuracy with lot of applications which could be there for the government, for defense, for intelligence. We did demonstrations, pilots with the NSG, highly appreciated, etc. And we frown at even applying for any of the grants which are there in the present policy framework. My question is not to go on a rant, but to ask both of you as to what do you think, or are there any sort of specific suggestions as to the changes in policy which the government of India can make so that startups like us don't have to face this situation and come to such conclusion?
Everybody wants to stay away from the government. I think that's the nutshell of it. And why is that so? This, I can say this for Garuda also. We've mostly steered very, very far and clear of the government. In fact, this event is the very first event where we've actually partnered with the government in anything. But Rajiv, please go ahead.
You're absolutely right. The current government policy is such that you better avoid it. But that doesn't mean that this policy should persist, because government is a machine with tremendous power, tremendous amount of money, tremendous legal authority. So, we should not let them get away with it. I mean, you have to do both. You have to, as your company is doing, you have to go autonomous. That is the Swaraj you are doing already, and I congratulate you. But at the same time, there has to be pressure on the government to get its act together, because it's got so much resource. So and also the big billionaire, trillionaire, these kind of category of people, the Reliances of the world and the Infosys and Tatas of the world, have not done their job over the last 20 years in building the technology. They don't have a shortage of money. They don't have a shortage of people. But they just wanted to do short-term, quick money-making Jugaad. And we have to hold them responsible also.
Absolutely. I'll take one from this side, maybe the young person here.
This question is more from the foreign policy side, and how sovereignty is understood from a foreign policy paradigm and a foreign policy lens. How do we understand our sovereignty in terms of our foreign policy, specifically foreign relations? Now, if we take the example of our relations with Israel, our outreach to global south, this is very novel to this government. But these were things which are not seen in the past governments. And I'm sure Ambassador Sibal would also somewhat agree to that as well, that our relations with our other nation states have been very different through governments. That has not been stagnant. It has not been consistent, if I may say so. How do we understand our sovereignty through those relations, given that our relation with the geographically proximate countries are not that strong? As Mr. Malhotra said, we are very dependent on other nations as well. So how do we understand our sovereignty? Because on one end, we say that US is one of our closest friends, but then he has Asim Munir coming to White House and then hosting him for lunch. So how do we understand our sovereignty, our internal sovereignty, through the foreign policy relations and for foreign policy relations and international relations which we have in current day?
I think what you said is not entirely correct. If you look at our foreign policy, there has been a lot of consistency. For example, we have remained non-aligned. We have now redefined non-alignment because the global situation has changed. Now we define it as strategic autonomy or multi-alignment or whatever. But basically, there is that consistency that we're not going to join any military bloc, military alliance, and want to have channels open to every possible partner of ours. With the US, some breakthrough was made in Vajpayee's time. We defined the US as a natural ally. And then during the UPA government, Manmohan Singh was criticized as being a lackey of the United States. We signed the nuclear deal and everything else. And the present Prime Minister and the BJP government is also consolidated our ties with the United States. So there has been a continuity there. With regard to Russia, it's the same thing. The Russia relationship has remained very important, and all governments. I was ambassador to Moscow when Manmohan Singh was in power, and I know the kind of efforts that we were making to keep our Russia ties in good order. And the same thing is happening today. We are attaching a lot of importance to that. In terms of membership of BRICS, SCO, and everything else, there has been a consistency there. Look at the Arab world. The present Prime Minister and the BJP government can take a lot of credit that we have, changed the entire relationship we have with these Islamic Gulf countries. But who took the first steps? Manmohan Singh himself traveled to Saudi Arabia, laid the foundation of this relationship. And this we have built on successive. With China, we've kept the doors of dialogue open in 1978, 1988. Rajiv Gandhi went there, and then in opening up. Again, when I was ambassador, I was foreign secretary. I accompanied Vajpayee to China, and we set up the special representatives group that continued under the later governments. It exists even now. Trade with China, we kept the doors open. We've had ups and downs with China during the UPA government, and now with Doctrine and with what happened in the Pak, everything becomes the problem. Japan, in Narasimha Rao, the Act East policy was directed at Japan. And then Prime Minister Monroe was very keen to deepen ties with Japan. And that policy has continued. You can look at Prime Minister. So, big countries like ours do not change their foreign policies so easily. There is a general view of what our national interest is. Now, the emphasis on this or that relationship, given the geopolitics of the time, can vary. But there is a basic consistency. Smaller countries can perhaps totally change their foreign policy optics because their choices are limited. But a big country like ours, there is a consistency. With regard to Israel also, the first opening came in Narasimha Rao's time, and then it got built up, and today we have very close relations with Israel. So the fundamental premise of your view, I don't think is valid.
So thank you so much, Kanwal ji, and thank you so much, Rajiv ji. This was just a wonderful session. There are so many people who still have questions. Yeah, go ahead.
I think you also talked about sovereignty. Sovereignty, you can say, is territorial sovereignty. It has very wide definition: political sovereignty, economic sovereignty, technological sovereignty, security sovereignty, cultural sovereignty. In all these areas, there's never any complete sovereignty or a challenge to it. I think the one thing which you can actually preserve and be strongly committed to is territorial sovereignty. Unless you get defeated is a different matter. But territorial sovereignty, countries are very attached to. But in other respects, it's flexible sovereignty. There never is complete sovereignty. There is a UN Charter, so you have to abide by the UN Charter. The United States may not, because it's far too powerful. But other countries, most other countries, have to, or at least pretend that they observe the UN Charter. There is international law which puts limit on your sovereignty. And there is a multilateral organization like the WTO which put restrictions on your sovereignty. You can't operate as you like. The globalization itself has created linkages which limit your sovereignty. Then the whole issue of standards. You can't develop your own standards. Then you have to see what the international standards are. Well, entire supply chain business, it limits your sovereignty in so many ways. Technological dependence limits your sovereignty. Rajiv mentioned that there are 4 or 5 countries which give us military equipment. That also limits your sovereignty. That social media is entirely under the control of the United States of America. And you've seen some kind of the things, the Gen Z business, how they can provoke it. So there is, that limits your sovereignty. The whole issue of data sovereignty.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kanwal ji. Thank you so much, Rajiv ji. Thank you, everybody, for the patience and for being so engaged. Namaste. We'll see you soon.